In this video, we're going to examine the concept of instructor presence in online spaces. And we'll talk about what this is, why it's important, because you'll see that research proves that this is really crucial for student success and retention and satisfaction in online and hybrid courses. And then we'll talk about some specific strategies that you can implement in your own course. Beginning with some definitions. The first concept to be thinking about is teaching presence. So teaching presence is what you're doing as you're building the course, and as you're building the course materials, content, assessments, when you're writing instruction prompts for your assignments, that is all teaching presence. So it's the design, the facilitation, and the direction of learning. It really has to do with what you're asking students to do cognitively and socially, but this is all tends to be sort of prep work that you do when you design your syllabus and you design your overall approach to your course. That's teaching presence. Instructor presence is the term used for sort of more live and observable instructional behaviors. So that's who you are in the course. So when you're sending out announcements or emails or participating in discussion forums or giving feedback on assignments, all of that is your instructor presence. When you're creating videos for students, that's all instructor presence. So it's how they get to know you. Obviously, teaching presence and instructor presence are very closely related, but it can also be interesting to think about them as two different concepts, because one tends to happen ahead of time in all the planning and building and design work that you do, and the other is during the live part of the course. And it's really how you bring yourself to the course and make sure that students feel a connection with you. I want to wrap up this definition with this instructor presence framework. So any course has these three elements, whether that's face-to-face or online. So social presence, that is where you're building community. You might have group work in your course. You're encouraging students to interact with you and interact with each other. And there's a social element there. It's as simple as saying hello to students when they enter a Zoom room, or what you would be doing when you're sort of talking with students a little bit more informally as part of your face-to-face classes. And then, of course, there's cognitive presence. So those are the way that you're helping students construct meaning, think critically, and reflect. And teaching presence, which we talked about. So what's really crucial here is that with teaching presence, with the overall design of your course, that you are thinking about a good balance between social and cognitive presence through your design choices. If the course is completely social, it isn't going to feel as rigorous to the students, and it isn't going to have as much of that cognitive presence. However, if your course is all cognitive presence, it's probably going to feel like an inflexible tutorial. So one of those sort of self-paced trainings that we sometimes have to go through. And that isn't what you want either. And research tells us that what is really needed is a combination of all of these things, really combining social presence and cognitive presence, teaching presence, and then that all comes together to mean you, yourself, your instructor presence that you bring to your online or hybrid course. I'm going to provide additional resources so that you can look into the research on your own, and I encourage you to look into research in your own discipline. But very, very briefly, I'm going to give you the broad overview about why this matters. So there have been several studies that have found a positive relationship between instructor presence and both student satisfaction of learning and, importantly, students' perception of their own learning. So asking students, do you feel that you are learning? And that's really crucial, because obviously students should feel that they are learning in our courses. Instructor to student interaction has been found to be the most important factor in student satisfaction. It isn't that student to student is not important, but instructor to student has been found to be the most important interaction. And I think this is an interesting finding that a positive instructor attitude toward online learning is really important in student satisfaction. It seems obvious, but just remember that your attitudes and your own approach to online learning and to technology is going to be seen by your students, and that will contribute to how satisfied they are in the course. I don't think that means you need to feel totally confident and comfortable with the technology, because none of us are, but even admitting when you're struggling can be helpful for students. What you don't want to do is project a negative attitude about online learning in general. I do need to give you this warning. Too much instructor presence can actually reduce student satisfaction, and I think that makes sense when you think about it. So if you have something like a discussion forum or even on your Moodle page, while of course you and your voice are important and your presence there is really crucial, too much is going to be frankly strange for students and could be off-putting. Your voice as the instructor is always going to feel louder than any other voice in the room, and that makes sense. That just has to do with the power dynamics in a classroom setting. So make sure you consider that and use your voice strategically, and use your voice to amplify student voices and draw out students, student thinking, and connect students with each other. But too much presence is not a good thing. Now we're going to talk about some specific strategies for building and maintaining instructor presence. The first thing I want to do is really help hone in on all the different communication opportunities that you have with your students in an online environment. And I'm going to put these into 3 categories. The first is public communication. So this is communication that is coming from you and going to everyone. You are not making anything, there's nothing individual about this. So this is sort of broad emails to the class about announcements, having a Q&A discussion forum where students can ask questions and you respond to them, but it's really in a public way. Having any sort of informal discussion, all of that is very public, and it isn't individualized. When you do things like write discussion forum prompts, or when you're writing your assignment sheet and instructions, all of that is public, right? Because it's out there for all the students to see, and it isn't individualized. I should have led with this, but when I'm using public here, I'm using public within the course. So this is just between you and your students in that course. I certainly don't mean public in the sense of on the internet. Labels in Moodle are a great strategy for that public communication. Everything you put there, images, text, that's seen by everyone and it's not individualized. And then a lot of the videos that you create for students are public. So if you're doing a walkthrough of your course, that is a, quote, public communication in that course. Then there's public but sort of individualized communication. And examples there are when you respond to student posts in forums. So every student in the class can see your response to an individual student in the forum, and that can be a really important opportunity. I left these as 2 separate points because the feedback that you give to students in the discussion forum is crucial. If you have a student who plagiarizes in the discussion forum, that's a tricky situation, and we're happy to help you think through when those tricky situations happen. But my advice to you is make sure you use it as a learning moment. You have to treat that respectfully, of course, but also if you were to ignore that in the discussion forum and other students picked up on that, that would not be good for your overall course dynamic, and that would not be good modeling for your students. So there are times where you have to give feedback to students in this sort of public way so that other students better understand what the expectations are in the course. When you create videos, so for example, if you were to do like a weekly wrap-up video, you might bring up some specific ideas that students had or what people contributed in discussion forums. And then of course, when you're in a synchronous session, so if you're in a Zoom session, you're often addressing students individually, but all of the students in that class are there. So it's, again, that kind of public but individualized communication. And then the last channel is probably the easiest to understand. private communication. So obviously your emails to students, when you're giving feedback on their work, grades are a form of private communication that is only instructor to student. If you have one-on-one phone or video calls, those are all private communication channels. So consider all of these communication opportunities because they all contribute to you building and maintaining your instructor presence. First impressions are crucial. The first week of class is really important in building your instructor presence, showing students who you are, and helping them adjust to the online learning environment. So email students early, even before class begins, and introduce yourself and the course. I always include a pre-course survey because I like to know how students rate themselves on skills such as comfort with technology. And we can share some examples of pre-course surveys, but I encourage you, this is an easy way so that you make sure you are understanding who the students are in your course, what sort of prior knowledge and experience they're coming with, what their goals are, and can then make it so that you can provide a more individualized experience for those students in that course. I think we've talked a lot about a getting started section, but that's really important to orienting students to your course. A welcome video goes right along with that. And I do advise you, if you're using discussion forums, participate a lot in them in the initial discussion forums. No matter what you're teaching, I hope that you will have a very simple introduction forum where students can introduce themselves. And I encourage you to respond to each student's post just with a simple welcome message. It goes a long way in students feeling that they are connected to you, feeling seen, and what you don't want is for students to feel that they are in a self-paced tutorial, because that's not what our online and hybrid courses are. Feedback is really crucial in developing and maintaining instructor presence. So research has found that formative feedback is more impactful than summative, and that's one of the reasons we've been emphasizing this in this workshop, is because the feedback that you give to students before the final paper or final project or whatever the final assessment is, the feedback that you give along the way is much more impactful because students can learn from that, process it, and then make changes. And prompt feedback is also crucial. One of the reasons we've emphasized things like using a rubric is that that provides almost immediate feedback to students without you needing to do a ton of work when it comes to providing individual comments. That's of course important, especially for students who are struggling or who really need more support from you. But what's most important is that you give that prompt feedback, because when students turn in an assignment, they want to know how they did. They want to hear your feedback. So try to be on a schedule where you can give that prompt feedback and use those Moodle tools that can help make that easier for you. The images that you incorporate in your course are important. Our first task in this workshop was to ask you to not have this as your profile picture, because you can see how this is not great at establishing instructor presence. So you may have an image of yourself. If you're not comfortable with that, you could use something like another image or one of these Bitmoji images. And I'll just end with these a couple of other sort of random ideas. So sharing timely content, current events, or things that are happening that relate to your course, that again, it shows students this is a live course. This is an instructor who cares about me, who's thinking, and who wants to help me connect things that are happening in the real world to things that are happening in the course. So bring that in as much as you can. You could create a word cloud from student submissions on an assignment or forum post just to show their thoughts in a different format. Think about something like pre-module or post-module notes or a video. But again, another way to show students that you are also an active participant and a timely participant in that course. I've never used social media. Some people do. It's a tool. Proceed with caution. And then think about your syllabus and how you bring yourself to your syllabus. Think about maximizing that tool and ways that you could adjust that to make sure that you're establishing that instructor presence with that very important course document. If you have questions about any of this or anything else, send us an email at moodlehelp@berkshirecc.edu.